There are situations in life you could never imagine, but once they happen, they make you question everything you thought you knew. This story is a prime example of the conflict between emotion and morality. Rebecca, a stepmother, never expected to find herself in this position when feelings began to blossom between her and her stepson Jackson. What seemed like an innocent relationship soon turned into an internal battle, forcing Rebecca to confront painful decisions about love, betrayal, and the boundaries of family. What happens when those boundaries are broken? Before continuing the story, tell me which city you are watching from. I want to know how far this video has come. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so I can send you exciting stories like this every day. My stepson asked me to sleep with him. I said yes. It's a really fantastic story. This story is a reflection of life's evenness and roughness. Rebecca never imagined she would remarry, but David changed that. He was everything her first husband wasn't: kind, dependable, and committed. Their marriage wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and she loved the life they'd built together. What she hadn't anticipated was how complex her relationship with his son Jackson would become. Jackson was 15 when she entered his life, reserved and distant. Over the years, they developed a polite but somewhat distant relationship. Neither overly warm nor strained, Rebecca thought this was the best they could hope for. But as Jackson grew into a handsome, confident young man, something shifted between them. With David traveling often for business, Rebecca and Jackson spent more time alone. It started innocently enough, sharing dinners, watching movies together. But the atmosphere in the house grew tense, charged with unspoken emotions that Rebecca couldn't quite place. Their conversations became deeper, more personal, and Rebecca found herself seeing Jackson not as her stepson, but as a man. One evening, after a long conversation over wine, Jackson said something that shattered the fragile balance. "I need to tell you something," he began, his voice unsteady. I have feelings for you." Rebecca's heart stopped. She didn't know how to respond. This was her stepson, a relationship that should be clearly defined. But there was something in the way Jackson looked at her, something that made her feel seen, desired, in a way she hadn't felt in years. The connection between them, once subtle, now felt undeniable. "Jackson, we can't," Rebecca whispered, but her words lacked conviction. Before either could say anything more, the front door opened. David was home early from his trip, cheerful and unaware of the tension that had just been broken. The evening passed in uneasy silence, but the weight of Jackson's confession lingered. That night, unable to sleep, Rebecca wandered into the kitchen, finding Jackson standing by the window. He turned to her, his face shadowed with regret, but his eyes still held that same intensity. "I need to tell you the truth," Jackson said, his voice low. "There's something you don't know." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. "What is it?" "Dad's been lying to you," Jackson said, his words deliberate. "He's been seeing someone else during his work trips. I found out months ago." The floor seemed to drop from beneath Rebecca. Her marriage, the foundation of her life, suddenly felt like a lie. Jackson's words swirled in her mind, and for the first time, she questioned everything. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Rebecca asked, her voice shaking. "I didn't want to hurt you," Jackson replied, "but when I saw how distant Dad had become, I couldn't just stand by. You deserve better than this." Rebecca's mind raced, torn between the betrayal she felt from David and the growing closeness she couldn't ignore with Jackson. She had always thought there were clear boundaries, but now those lines were blurring. She was no longer sure what was right. Jackson took her hand. His touch was soft, but filled with intensity. "I didn't plan this, Rebecca. I didn't plan to fall for you." In that moment, Rebecca knew she had a choice that wasn't just about the past or the future, but a turning point that could change everything. She could turn away, cling to the remnants of her broken marriage, or she could face the truth of what had been growing between her and Jackson. The weight of that decision pressed down on her, but her heart already knew what it wanted. She could continue living in a lie, holding on to the remnants of the marriage that once felt so solid. The life she had built, the security she thought she had, was suddenly shattered. Rebecca knew deep down that the life she had been leading was no longer real. It was a mirage that had slowly eroded beneath the surface. Every moment of the past now seemed tainted by the reality of David's betrayal. She had once thought she could endure it, but now that very endurance felt hollow. Or Rebecca could face the truth. She could look directly at the emotions that had been developing between her and Jackson, emotions that were no longer vague or uncertain. These feelings had become undeniable, and no matter how much she tried to push them away, they were there, taking root in her heart. The connection she had with Jackson was not just familial. It was something deeper, something more complex than what she had ever imagined. Could Rebecca find the courage to face these feelings? Could she step away from the shadows of betrayal, pain, and uncertainty to embrace something new, something she hadn't expected to feel? Was she ready to risk it all for a love that was impossible to ignore? In the stillness of the kitchen, Rebecca could hear her heart pounding, each beat calling her to make a decision. She turned toward Jackson, who stood before her with eyes full of resolve, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Jackson was no longer just the son of her husband. He had become part of her heart. He was no longer a distant figure. He had come to mean more than words could explain. In that moment, Rebecca knew that logic no longer mattered. The barriers she had placed to keep herself safe were now irrelevant. The emotions she had buried so deep were surging to the surface. This wasn't a decision that could be made lightly, but her heart had already spoken. She could feel the truth of it in every part of her being. With a deep breath, Rebecca stepped closer to Jackson, their presence filling the room. Their eyes locked, and no further words were needed. Rebecca, in a voice barely above a whisper, spoke the word that would change everything. Yes. Rebecca stood motionless in the darkness of the kitchen, her hands trembling as she tightly held Jackson's. The feeling was sudden, indescribable, as if the whole world was collapsing around her. She couldn't comprehend what was happening, couldn't believe she was in this situation. Everything before her seemed blurry. Her mind wanted to resist, to search for reasons to reject, to return to the safety she once knew. But her heart couldn't stop beating wildly, tangled in emotions so intense she had never expected to experience. Rebecca had always thought that her love for David was everything. She had loved him with all her trust and hope. But now the truth Jackson revealed shattered everything into pieces. David, the husband with whom she had thought she had built a stable life, was lying to her. And Jackson, the son whom she had always seen as an inseparable part of the family, was the one who had led her into this emotional storm she had never been prepared for. In those months when David was away on business, Rebecca and Jackson grew closer. The quiet evenings spent together, conversations that started as small talk, gradually turned into deep questions about life, about things that had been forgotten. Jackson was no longer just a boy, he was a man, captivating in ways she couldn't deny. And with every glance into his eyes, Rebecca felt an intense longing she hadn't felt in years. But she couldn't ignore the betrayal. David had hurt her, and even more so when he was not the only one responsible. Jackson, his own son, was the one who had led her into this situation. Rebecca felt as if she had been pushed into a dead end, between a broken family and a new love with a man who, by all rights, should have been her son. How could she love a man who was the son of her husband? The quiet night enveloped the house, and Rebecca stood there, caught between conflicting emotions. She wondered if she could continue living in a marriage that had been betrayed, or if she could pursue this new love without destroying everything she had built before. These choices weighed heavily on her, and each step forward felt like a trade-off. Her heart pounded, one part wanting to return to the safety she once knew, another part yearning to embrace a love that was new and foreign. She looked at Jackson, and even though everything still felt uncertain, she knew that things would never be the same again. She had made her choice, but fear still gripped her. Rebecca understood that this was not an easy story, and there would be no simple ending. But at least she had found a path for herself, one that could lead her into darkness or could possibly bring her into the light. There was no other choice but to face the emotions that had overwhelmed her heart. After the pivotal moment when Rebecca faced her emotions and admitted her feelings for Jackson, everything around her seemed to shift. She was no longer the woman she had been just hours before. Everything had changed. The feeling, whether it was freedom or anxiety, still made her heart race every time she thought about it. Jackson, standing beside her, was equally bewildered. They both knew they had entered a path that could not be undone. The following days passed in heavy silence. David remained absent, and each evening, Rebecca and Jackson were left alone with their private thoughts. They didn't speak much, but the emotions between them hung in the air, unspoken yet undeniable. Every time Jackson's eyes met Rebecca's, there was a connection that words could not capture. The long nights passed in stillness, and Rebecca felt as though the world had contracted to just her and Jackson, surrounded by questions with no clear answers. She began to realize that every decision she had made, whether it was about her marriage to David or her relationship with Jackson, had been choices she never truly expected. Everything had seemed so clear before, but now nothing was simple or certain. Rebecca wondered whether she could truly continue in a love like this, when everything around her was changing. One morning, as soft sunlight filtered through the window, Rebecca felt a strange emptiness. She knew she couldn't just stand still, couldn't remain in this confusion forever. She and Jackson would have to face the future without clear answers. She looked at him and saw in his eyes the same unspoken questions. Their relationship could not continue as it had before, but neither could it be neatly defined. Then one evening, as they sat together in silence, Rebecca felt a sense of quiet peace. She realized that while things could never go back to how they were, at least they still had each other. That was the one thing she could be certain of. They didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but at least one thing was clear. They would face them together, even knowing the road would not be easy. When Jackson quietly took Rebecca's hand, she understood that this was the first step on a new journey, one they would have to walk together. She didn't know where they would go, but she no longer felt afraid. Whether unclear or illuminated, Rebecca felt this was the path she had to take, and at least she wouldn't be walking it alone. From the story of Rebecca and Jackson, I can't help but reflect on the complexities of relationships in life. Sometimes we think we understand love, ethics, and what is considered right and acceptable. But in reality, love and betrayal can overturn all those norms. In those decisive moments, when we are faced with difficult choices, the heart and mind do not always walk hand in hand easily. Everyone has moments where they must confront themselves, choosing between emotion and reason, between what is right and what they truly desire. Rebecca's story is not unique. We sometimes find ourselves in situations that we cannot control, relationships that become complicated and blur the lines of socially established values. Love is not always as beautiful as we imagine, and stories like Rebecca and Jackson's show us that love can sometimes take paths we cannot predict. It is a challenge full of emotions and pain, but from it, each person will find their own answers. Looking at Rebecca, I feel her pain and the difficulty in confronting her emotions. She had to make a monumental decision in her life, a choice that could change everything for her. And I believe that no matter how hard that decision was, people like Rebecca, those who dare to face the truth and follow their heart, are the strongest. Life doesn't always offer us easy choices, but sometimes standing up and choosing the path we believe is right is the most important thing. With this story, I also realize that nothing lasts forever. Relationships, even when built on love and trust, can change over time. Human emotions are things that shift easily, and sometimes we have to accept that what we thought was right may not be the best choice. However, what truly matters is that we must be honest with ourselves, with the emotions we are experiencing. The story of Rebecca and Jackson is a profound example of the complicated relationships that arise when emotion and reason collide, creating situations filled with conflict and unpredictability. In a world where everything seems to be falling apart, it is often our hearts that guide us down paths we never could have imagined. This story is not only a journey of love, but also a confrontation with oneself, a battle with difficult decisions, and most importantly, the courage to face the truth. Each of us encounters moments when we must choose between holding on to what we have and pursuing what our heart truly desires. Yet sometimes it is those very choices that open new doors, leading us down paths filled with challenges and surprises. Though these decisions may bring tears and pain, they are the very moments that allow us to grow, learn what it truly means to love, and understand the depth of our desires. The relationship between Rebecca and Jackson is a clear reflection of this complexity, where all moral boundaries are tested and individuals are forced to make decisions they can never undo. Love is not something that can be simply defined. It can come from the most unexpected places. It can invade relationships we never thought could change. Yet it is this very love, though it may cause suffering, that helps us understand ourselves and what we truly want. The bond between Rebecca and Jackson is not just a turmoil of emotions, but a lesson in courage and empathy. So what about you? What do you think of the tough situations in love and family? Would you dare to face the truth in those defining moments? Share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel to follow more moving stories, profound lessons, and touching moments. We will continue to bring you stories that make you reflect and expand your view on life. Hit the subscribe button today and join us in discovering more interesting, emotional tales in the upcoming videos.